Known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or Milwaukee Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer committed 17 murders, shocking the world with the disturbing nature of his crimes, which included not only murder but also acts of necrophilia, cannibalism, and the preservation of body parts. This documentary will explore the trajectory of Dahmer's life, from his beginnings to the depths of his violent tendencies. Born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Dahmer was raised by Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. In the beginning, he experienced a seemingly typical suburban upbringing. However, instability soon crept into his life. Joyce struggled with mental health challenges, and Lionel's work commitments often kept him away. As Jeffrey grew, he increasingly felt abandoned and disconnected, developing a sense of isolation that would eventually deepen his detachment from others. In 1978, at just 18 years old, Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder, mere months after his high school graduation. His victim, Stephen Hicks, was an 18-year-old hitchhiker, whom Dahmer brought home under the pretense of companionship. Once there, Dahmer struck Hicks with a dumbbell, strangled him, and ultimately killed him. He later dismembered the body, dissolving parts in acid and burying fragments in his family's backyard. This crime marked the beginning of Dahmer's descent into a series of horrific acts that would later capture national attention. After a brief stint in the U.S. Army, where his drinking problems worsened, Dahmer moved to Milwaukee in the late 1980s. Here, his killing spree began in earnest, targeting young men, mostly from marginalized communities, often luring them to his apartment with promises of money or companionship. His typical method involved incapacitating his victims with drugs, then strangling or stabbing them to death. Dahmer's sadistic tendencies grew as he became more comfortable with his crimes. He began engaging in necrophilia, often having sex with the corpses before dismembering them. In some cases, Dahmer would photograph the bodies, freeze parts of the remains, and even consume them. Their victims like Stephen Tuomi, Anthony Sears, and Raymond Smith met their tragic ends in this period. Dahmer was methodical, rarely deviating from his ritualistic methods, ensuring his apartment became a chamber of horrors. In many cases, he would preserve the skulls and body parts of his victims as trophies. One of the most horrifying aspects of Dahmer's crimes was his descent into cannibalism. After killing and dismembering his victims, Dahmer began to experiment with consuming parts of their bodies. He later confessed that eating his victims made him feel as if they were part of him, a twisted attempt at achieving control and companionship. Dahmer's reign of terror finally came to an end on July 22, 1991, when Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man who Dahmer had attempted to victimize, managed to escape. Edwards flagged down two police officers, Rolf Mueller and Robert Routh, who were patrolling the area. He led the officers back to Dahmer's apartment at 924 North 25th Street, a nondescript, rundown building that concealed one of the most horrifying crime scenes in American history. When the officers knocked on Dahmer's door, he invited them in, appearing unnerved but compliant. Edwards, still visibly shaken and wearing the handcuffs, pleaded with the officers to investigate. What the police found inside was beyond anything they had encountered in their careers. Officer Mueller entered Dahmer's bedroom and discovered a drawer filled with Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies in various stages of decomposition and dismemberment. Realizing the photographs were taken in the same apartment, Mueller called for backup. When Dahmer saw Mueller holding the photos, he reportedly tried to resist arrest, but the officers quickly subdued him. As the backup officers arrived, the full scale of Dahmer's atrocities began to unfold. The apartment, littered with disturbing trophies from his victims, told the story of years of unspeakable horror. Investigators discovered a refrigerator containing a severed human head, a freezer full of human remains, and containers of preserved body parts, including organs. Skulls and bones were found meticulously arranged throughout the apartment. Dahmer had been living among the dismembered remains of his victims in what had become a true house of horrors. The stench of decomposition was overwhelming, yet neighbors had either ignored or dismissed their suspicions. Dahmer remained disturbingly calm during his arrest, confessing to the murders without much hesitation. Over the following days, he provided police with detailed confessions, walking them through the twisted and macabre steps of his killings, often in a chillingly matter-of-fact manner. His candor was unnerving as he laid bare the true extent of his depravity, recounting each murder in gruesome detail. He admitted to drugging, strangling, and dismembering his victims, as well as engaging in necrophilia and cannibalism. After his arrest, the details of Jeffrey Dahmer's gruesome crimes shocked the nation and the world. Public outrage mounted as the full scope of his killing spree became clear.
Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons. Sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled.
Jeffrey Dahmer was charged with 17 counts of murder, but his defense team entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. They built their argument on the premise that Dahmer's uncontrollable sexual urges, his necrophilic behavior, and the grotesque details of his crimes were symptomatic of profound mental illness. Dahmer's actions, such as dismembering his victims, preserving body parts, and engaging in cannibalism, were seen as proof of a deeply disturbed individual, detached from reality. His most macabre attempt to create zombies. By drilling holes into the skulls of some of his victims and injecting acid or boiling water into their brains was presented as a delusion born of a fractured mind. These were not the actions of a rational person. The defense argued, but of someone whose perception of reality had been severely warped by mental illness. Jeffrey Dahmer's parents, Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, had complex and difficult emotions to process. They were torn between the horror of their son's crimes and their love for him as their child. Though Joyce was largely absent during the trial, Lionel spoke more openly, especially in interviews and through his book A Father's Story, reflecting on the guilt and responsibility he felt.
How would you describe Jeffrey as a youngster when you were growing up?
Excuse me, doctor, if you don't mind. We don't know, we don't relate to Jeffrey.
Okay, Jeff.
He's Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you.
That these things will look different now. But Jeff was fascinated with a rotting animal carcass under the house and played with the bones and referred to them as fiddlesticks.
It was a terrible smell, so I went underneath and cleaned it out, the smell of the skunk, and cleaned out whatever else was under, cans and bones, and collected them all. And Jeff...
Once convicted, Jeffrey Dahmer was transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. His life behind bars became a subject of intense media interest. In interviews, Dahmer expressed a degree of remorse for his actions, acknowledging the devastation he had caused. He also claimed to have found religion, being baptized in prison and reportedly undergoing a spiritual transformation. However, many of the victims' families and the public viewed his conversion with skepticism, considering it too little, too late.
The oldest sister of Errol Lindsay, whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker. I hate you. This is out of control. Don't fuck with me, Jeffrey. I'll kill you. God damn it. Look at me, motherfucker. I can kill you.
What's your name, fast?
I can kill you.
Dahmer's time in prison was not easy. His notoriety made him a target among other inmates, and his crimes, particularly his acts of cannibalism and necrophilia, placed him at the bottom of the prison hierarchy. He spent much of his time in isolation during the early part of his incarceration, but eventually he was moved to a less secure unit where he interacted more with other prisoners. Despite his attempts to keep a low profile, Dahmer's life in prison was punctuated by threats and acts of violence from fellow inmates. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer's life came to a brutal end. He was assigned to a work detail with two other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. While cleaning a bathroom in the prison gym, Scarver, who had a history of mental illness and had been convicted of murder, attacked Dahmer and Anderson with a metal bar. Dahmer was struck repeatedly in the head and died from his injuries shortly after. Scarver later explained that he had killed Dahmer because of his crimes and the perceived lack of remorse. In interviews, Scarver stated that Dahmer would taunt other inmates by shaping his food to resemble body parts, making light of his gruesome acts. Whether or not this is true, Dahmer's murder brought a violent end to the life of one of history's most infamous criminals. The brutal crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer left a haunting impact on American society, exposing chilling truths about unchecked desires, mental illness, and missed opportunities by law enforcement. Despite multiple warning signs, such as frequent complaints from neighbors about foul odors coming from his apartment, authorities failed to intervene effectively. Jeffrey Dahmer's life and crimes remain a disturbing reminder of the darkest aspects of human nature. His legacy endures as a stark testament to human cruelty and institutional shortcomings, highlighting not only the horrors he committed but the complex flaws in the systems that failed to stop him.